There's a version of this story that never makes it into interviews. It doesn't show up on LinkedIn. You won't find it in a case study. It's the part that happens at 3 or 4 in the morning when the business is quiet, the team is asleep, and the founder is alone with a spreadsheet and head of worst-case scenarios. Most entrepreneurs think the danger in a crisis is financial, and yes, cash matters. But the real threat comes earlier. It comes before the money runs out. It starts the moment the founder's thinking gets compromised. Businesses don't fail because a crisis arrives. They fail because the person at the top stops thinking clearly and starts reacting. This is the story of what that looks like and what it takes to come back from it. Meet Daniel. He runs a small digital agency, 10 people, solid clients, steady revenue. Nothing spectacular, but stable. He's been building for 4 years. He knows his numbers. He has a process. He's cautious, not reckless. By most measures, he's doing the right things. Then, in the span of 3 weeks, 2 of his largest clients pause their contracts. Not cancel, pause. They say it's temporary. They say it's a budget review. They say they'll be in touch. The revenue drop is significant, around 30%. Not fatal, but enough to change the math on payroll, on runway, on everything Daniel had planned for the next 6 months. In his next team meeting, Daniel smiles. He tells them it's a speed bump. He sounds confident. He says the pipeline looks good. He says they'll be fine. And then he goes home, sits down with his laptop, and stays up until 2 in the morning running numbers he's already run 3 times that day. The crisis has arrived, but what's happening in Daniel's head is already worse than what's happening in the books. There's a thing the brain does under sustained pressure. It narrows. It stops processing broadly and starts scanning for threats. It's a biological response, not a character flaw. But that narrowing has consequences. When you're in threat scanning mode, you don't make strategic decisions. You make protective ones. And protection and strategy are very different things. For Daniel, it starts subtly. He checks the bank balance more often than he needs to. He delays a response to a potential client because he wants to get the pricing exactly right. He cancels a team lunch to save a few $100s. Then it gets less subtle. He starts reviewing work his team has already approved. He sends late-night messages asking for updates. He rewrites a client proposal that his best account manager spent 2 days preparing. His team notices. They don't say anything, but they notice. The energy in the office shifts. People start double-checking their own work, not because standards changed, but because they're not sure what Daniel wants anymore. Meanwhile, the financial reports sit unopened on Daniel's desk. He tells himself he'll look at them when there's something to see. The truth is, he doesn't want to confirm what he's afraid of. He's avoiding the numbers, while at the same time running numbers constantly in his head. And the ones in his head are always worse. This is how the invisible collapse works. It's not dramatic. There's no single moment where everything falls apart. It's slow, gradual, a series of small decisions that each seem reasonable on their own, but compound. 6 weeks in, Daniel makes a decision he can't take back. A new prospect reaches out. Mid-sized company, reasonable budget, exactly the kind of client he's been trying to land for 2 years. Daniel quotes them a price 40% below his standard rate. No conversation, no discovery call, just a number designed to close fast. They pass. The prospect doesn't even ask for a lower number. They just move on to someone else. Later, Daniel finds out they chose a competitor at a higher price. That's what panic pricing does. It doesn't signal value. It signals urgency, and clients can read urgency. It tells them you need the deal more than they do. But the real breaking point isn't the lost prospect. It comes the following week in a hallway conversation. One of Daniel's senior team members, someone who's been with him since nearly the beginning, stops him before a meeting and asks quietly, "Are we going to be okay?" Daniel says yes, of course, but that night he asks himself the same question and doesn't have an answer. That question doesn't go away, and it's the beginning of something important. On a Saturday morning, Daniel decides to actually look at the numbers. No phone, no interruptions, just the financials. What he finds is not good, but it's also not what he feared. They have runway. Fewer months than he'd like, but more than he'd been telling himself at 3 a.m. The situation is tight. It is not terminal. He sits with that for a while, and then, almost accidentally, he writes 2 words on a notepad, 2 columns. On the left, everything he cannot control: market sentiment, client budget cycles, the economic environment, what competitors are doing, whether that paused client comes back or not. On the right, what he can control: his expenses, the quality of the work his team delivers, how he communicates with his clients, how he shows up as a leader each day, what the agency does with the hours it has. He looks at both columns. Then he looks at where his attention had been going for the last 6 weeks. Almost everything had been going to the left. The things he couldn't affect, the scenarios he couldn't change, the clients who weren't returning his calls. The right column, the one with actual levers he could pull, had been mostly ignored. That was the realization. Not a strategy, not a plan, just clarity about where he'd been putting himself and where he actually needed to be. What Daniel built over the next few days wasn't complicated. It was 3 rules he committed to following for the rest of the crisis. The first rule: no reactive decisions for 72 hours. Whenever something happened that made him want to respond immediately, a client inquiry, a financial concern, a team issue, he gave himself 72 hours before taking action. Not to delay indefinitely, just to create distance between the trigger and the response. Urgency is rarely as urgent as it feels. The second rule: look at the actual numbers, not the imagined ones. Every week, Daniel committed to sitting with the real financial picture. Not the version in his head, which was always catastrophic, but the actual numbers on the page. He learned that real numbers, even bad ones, are easier to manage than imagined numbers. They have edges. They're specific. You can work with specific. The third rule: tell the team what's real. Not everything, not the raw financials, but something real. He called a short meeting, 20 minutes, and told his team that things were tight, that he was working on it, and that he'd keep them updated. No false optimism, no dramatic warnings, just honesty. The response surprised him. Instead of panic, there was calm. People respected knowing the truth. A few of them came to him afterward with ideas, ways to tighten operations, client opportunities they'd been sitting on. The team hadn't needed protecting from the truth. They'd needed to be trusted with it. None of these steps solved the financial situation immediately. They weren't meant to. What they did was stop the bleeding that was coming from inside the building. Over the following 2 months, Daniel's agency stabilized, not recovered, stabilized. One of the paused clients returned at a reduced scope. 2 new clients came in at the right price, not the discounted one. The team held together. But the more significant change wasn't in the numbers, it was in how Daniel understood himself. He'd always thought of himself as someone who could handle pressure. Most founders do. But he realized that handling pressure is a skill, not a personality trait. It requires practice, it requires specific habits, and it requires recognizing early when your thinking has been compromised. He started paying attention to what he now called his signals. The first sign that stress was distorting his thinking. For him, it was the urge to micromanage, to take back work he'd already delegated. For someone else, it might be avoidance or impulsive spending or silence. The trigger is different for different people. But the pattern is the same for almost everyone. Threat appears, brain narrows, thinking degrades, decisions get worse. And because the decisions are being made by the person at the top, the damage spreads. What protects against that chain isn't courage. It's not resilience in the motivational poster sense of the word. It's something more practical. The ability to notice when you're in that state, and to have a process for not making major decisions while you're inside it. A crisis will test your business model. It will test your cash reserves. It will test your relationships with clients and partners and your team. But the first test, the one that determines how all the others go, is internal. It's whether the person steering the ship can stay functional under pressure. The market doesn't decide who outlasts a storm. The economics don't decide it. The funding doesn't decide it. Your nervous system does.